I have been, yes, recording is in progress. Okay, so I have to watch what I say now. I have been involved with adult basic skills education for 28 years. And I'm not one of those people that say, man, I've been doing this for 28 years and I know it all, because man, I don't. I think the more that I do it, the more questions that I have and wondering, have I been doing anything right is probably my biggest question. But I'm always looking forward for the opportunity to learn and looking forward to learning today from all of you. And this will be an interactive session, so please participate, and I'll mention various times when you can do this either by chat or we're all family here, so we can just unmute and talk as well. So just very happy to be with you today. So our schedule today, 11 o'clock your time to 12:15 is the webinar. And this is part A, by the way. Part B will be this afternoon, and we will continue on this theme. So it will be a continuation of what we've been learning about sticky teaching. So, but 11 to 12:15 is our schedule. As from your awesome website, we probably knew this already. So we're going to start today with some South Dakota trivia, because that's what we do when we're presenting in South Dakota. So please answer in the chat this question. It's a true-false question, so we've got a 50% chance of getting it right. So the question is this: true or false? The singer, and I guess she's an actress too, Cher. I know some of our younger folks under 30 are like, who is that? I've never heard of Cher before. The goddess of pop, she used to call herself. But anyways, in several movies as well. So the question is, the singer Cher thought Mount Rushmore was a natural phenomenon. Is that a true statement or a false statement? So please put that in the chat. I don't know who's behind the 2021 South Dakota, but the drug comment was pretty funny. So looks like true so far in the early polling is going. So what we're going to do to start off here in just a minute is we're going to be watching a video. And in this video, and I will reveal the answer in just a second as well, because I know people are hanging here about wondering about Cher, but we're going to be watching a video that shows some young people jumping rope. They're doing something called double Dutch rope jumping. And there will be some young ladies wearing green t-shirts, and there'll be two of these young ladies. And I want you to count how many times either one of them, so you're going to get a total count, either one of them jumps rope, and they'll demonstrate in the video about what that exactly is going to look like. So be prepared to do that. Let's see, lately it appears that the falses are getting some more traction, but I do have to say that Cher thought that Mount Rushmore was a natural phenomenon. So that answer is true. So thank you everyone so much for participating. One thing I read said that the guys' faces, the president's faces on Mount Rushmore had less work done on them than Cher's face over the years, but I can neither confirm nor deny that. Only her plastic surgeon knows for sure. So anyway, but I don't want to diss on Cher. So anyway, there we have a picture of the video that we'll be seeing in just a second, and you can see the two young ladies dressed in green t-shirts. So again, we're going to count the number of times that they jump over the rope. So let me stop the share and let me find the video. There we go. And let me do the new share. There we go. Okay, that's that. Aha, there we go. Let's see, do I have the sound to share? Okay, that would help. All right, so we've got the sound rolling. So here we go, and I will be pausing this. I hope we can see the video screen. So let's go ahead and start, and hopefully the volume is going to behave itself.
Today we're going to play a game specifically designed to test your spatial awareness. Meet the Brain Games Double Dutch team. Now, what does jumping rope have to do with the brain? Well, Double Dutch requires off-the-chart spatial awareness. And today, these kids are going to help us test yours. For this game, all you have to do is keep track of the number of times that either of the girls in green jumps. You'll count each time one of them lands a jump, like this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As you can see, these jumpers are pretty quick on their feet, so you're gonna have to pay attention to keep up. When the whistle blows, start counting. Ready?
Okay, so are we ready? We're going to count the number of times either of the girls in green jumps and get a total is what we're looking for. So everyone ready? Everyone give me a thumbs up if we're ready to do that. And you're on camera. Of course, if you're off camera, that would be harder for me to see that. But anyway, here we go.
Go.
So go ahead, please, and put in the chat how many times you think these young ladies in the green jumped rope. And I'm saying, Steve, this was hard because sometimes they were both jumping, and other times other ones were jumping. And you may be wondering, I thought this was a workshop on sticky teaching. What on earth does jumping rope have to do with any of this? And there is a reason, there is a meaning behind this. It is something that is going to be one of the big takeaways from our presentation today. So if you would, please, again, put inside the chat how many times that these young ladies are jumping rope. Take a guess. I want everybody to take a guess. Doesn't matter if it were right or wrong. It's just, we're just taking a guess. So please go ahead and continue to fill up the chat. How many times do you think it was done? How many times did either of these young ladies in green jump rope? So give everyone another second. And now we're going to watch again. I want you to think, as we're seeing the rest of this video, what did this have to do with teaching? Because it does have a lot to do with teaching, and especially what the host is going to mention here in just a minute. So let's continue with the video and be thinking as you're watching the rest of this video, what on earth does this have to do with teaching? Okay, let's finish out the video.
So, how many jumps did the green team make? Did you say 38? If so, you agreed with 40% of our test audience. Now, some of you may be onto us, but for those of you who aren't, did you happen to notice anything else going on during the double dutch? Maybe a giant chicken strolling right through the middle of the set and doing a funky chicken dance? Now, some of you may have missed that funky chicken, but many of you probably saw it. And that's okay, because the chicken was just there to distract you too. Here's the real question. What color?
Okay, so how many noticed the chicken? If you noticed the chicken, give me a thumbs up. Did you notice the chicken? So first time I saw it, I did not notice the chicken. But I would also like for you to put in the chat, did you notice anything else that happened that might have been a little out of the ordinary while this video was going on? Did you notice anything else that was going on here? So let's see here. I'm looking at the guesses now, and since Kim was so honest, open, and transparent, I will be as well. I've watched this a number of times, and I get a different number every time. So 38 may be right. I'm not 100% sure, but let's see. We had several guesses here ranging from 4 to 40. So we got a good range going on here. Let's see, and we're getting some technical questions about double dutch that I can't answer. So maybe someone, I've never done double dutch, but anyways, let's see. Monica mentions that she noticed the chicken, but nothing else. I was so focused on the green jumpers, says Stephanie, that I only paid attention to them. Stephanie, I think you're on to something. Let's see. The mystery person behind the 2021 South Dakota summer said it looks like the film was sliced. Not sure what that means, but anyway, So I stopped focusing after the chicken because I thought that was the answer. Ah, Nikita, it could be, it could be. And Paul said I was so focused on the task, I didn't notice much else. So continue to put please in the chat. What does this have to do with teaching? Be thinking about that while we watch the rest of the video.
Color was the wall behind the double Dutch game. Here's a hint. It wasn't the same color at the end as it was when they started jumping. The back wall was changing color the entire time, from bright blue to bright red. Nearly everyone misses it. But why? It turns out there's far too much information coming in through the eyes at any given moment for the brain to fully process all of it. As a result, the brain has to act like a spotlight, focusing our attention on some parts of the scene but not others. Now, most of you were probably paying attention to the jumpers, and some of you may have suspected that something strange was going to happen, and so you saw the chicken. But you probably weren't paying attention to the back wall. And what we don't pay attention to, we don't see. And hey, for those of you who managed to catch everything so far, did you notice that we also swapped the rope turners out halfway through? Gotcha.
Gotcha, indeed. It does. Anything with housing is filling me with dread right now. Okay, we got that set. So let me go back and share the PowerPoint here. So again, please in the chat, what on earth does this have to do with teaching? What we just saw in what the gentleman was talking about, what does this have to do with teaching? Whoops. Whoops, whoops, whoops. Or would any brave soul like to unmute and give us their thought? What does this have to do with teaching? And I'm doing some good wait time here, waiting for good responses. I'm waiting.
This maybe isn't the answer you're looking for, but I assume that if my students think they have the answer right away, they're going to also tune out like I did.
Well, Nikita, I think there's many answers to the question, and that could certainly be one of them. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to hazard a guess as to what this has to do with teaching?
There's some interesting chat responses.
Just that we might miss out on things that we're supposed to be learning, but we're so focused on one thing that we don't get the entire picture. So our students may be seeing something different than what we are presenting.
Ah, so I think we've got several good things here that that are going on. There we go. I had a chat issue in a minute here. And thank you again for everyone who's participated. And I think, and thank you for that great comment as well. Yeah, Brenda mentioned students miss most of what's going on. Danette mentioned the students are only focused on one thing, and that may not be the task at hand. Danette, I think you're very much onto something. There is so much information that comes at us from everywhere. And Dwayne, I love the way that you express this. There are many distractions and concentration hurts. That is a very profound statement. Concentration hurts because we do have to do an act of will to make it happen. Karen, thank you. Can't see the forest for the trees. And sometimes we prepare this great and wonderful lesson where we think, you know, this is the main idea I really want my students to get, and they get something that is completely different than what we were expecting. And we certainly see that a lot. Let's see, Heather mentioned students get so focused on one aspect that they miss everything around them that they need to learn from. And I think that is very, very important. So thank you. I think we see several things there. I was also struck by that statement that what we don't pay attention to, we don't see. So we saw that young lady there in the beach. I think that was filmed near Minot, but she was so focused on the camera that she did not see that big wave that came up behind her and got her. So what we don't pay attention to, we don't see. And I think that has a lot to do with sticky teaching. So we're going to be using our handout quite a bit today. And of course, you can get that on the website. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what stimuli does the brain pay attention to and why. And we're going to talk about some things that make teaching sticky, like mystery, like novelty or new things, like sensory experiences, our five senses and movement. And then more in part 2, we'll get into spaced learning. That does not mean spaced out learning, but we'll talk about what that is. Community and personal relevance, that's more in part B, about how those things lend themselves to sticky teaching. And we'll talk about how we can incorporate that so students remember what we're teaching for the long haul. So page 2 in your handout, let me define what we're talking about. Teaching that sticks. What exactly do you mean, Steve? What are you talking about? Well, middle of page 2, what I'm talking about is teaching that is engaging, that students are caught up in, that students are present for, that students really want to learn from. It's also teaching that is understandable, because we can, teach the greatest lesson in the world, but if our students don't understand what content that we're trying to deliver, we have not quite met our goal. So teaching that sticks has got to be understandable. And also it needs to be memorable. We want students to remember those skills that we are teaching them for the long haul, so that then when they get into testing situations, that they'll be able to use and learn from what we've been teaching them. So page 3, we're going to shift over gears here. Actually, this is really on the bottom of page 2. Our brain has a gatekeeper, and it is called the reticular activating system. Say that 5 times fast. Or like, I'm going to call it the RAS, because reticular activating system is hard to say multiple times. The RAS is really a good thing, because just think a moment while we're sitting here, or while you're sitting at your homes or at your places of work. Think about all the stimuli that are bombarding your brain right at this moment. There's so many things that we see in our field of vision. We're also hearing noises. We're also feeling like the pressure of the clothes on our body. We may also be smelling the remnants of the frittata that we cooked for breakfast this morning. And we may be tasting, I have a cough drop in my mouth. I'm tasting the cough drop that I have inside my mouth. So, if we paid attention to every piece of stimuli that was bombarding us, that we couldn't do anything. We would just be so focused on everything that was happening, we couldn't do anything. So I guess we can be thankful that the RAS is there, and that the RAS is available to help us to deal with all these stimuli that are coming. And I like to teach with metaphors and analogies, relating things to what students know already. And we'll be talking more about that in part B. The RAS acts as a filter and also as a gatekeeper. So the RAS helps us to weed out all that information, and our brain, like they mentioned in that video, like a spotlight, is directing us toward the things that we want to focus on. So the RAS acts as a filter and also a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper stops various things from coming in. So it serves that dual function, and we can be thankful for it. However, we also can be, when our students aren't getting those essential things that we want to get, we want to try to use the knowledge of what gets through the RAS to help in teaching, and to help that stickiness, so that folks will remember this long term. So we see the ever popular airport check-in system when they're going through the TSA screening. So what gets through the RAS? And if you'll join me, if you're not already on page 3 of the handout, that is where you need to be. So we're going to look at several things, and we're going to start with a mystery and also novelty, or things that are new. And we'll give some props here to Neil Armstrong. And he said, mystery creates wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand. Well said, Neil. Well said. So mysteries are very powerful, and I've heard mysteries described as like an itch that you just have to scratch. And so how can we incorporate mystery or novel, new things inside our teaching? So got a quick question here for you. Now, looking at books, I love books. I love reading. The best-selling author of all times, most folks would agree that the Bible is the best-selling work of all times. And the collected works of Shakespeare are a close second to that, or are second to that. I don't remember exactly how much there were. So who is the best-selling author beyond the Bible in the Shakespeare, on the Shakespeare and Shakespeare? So we have a very astute group here in South Dakota who is able to recognize from this picture who that is. So John, Becky, well done. Karen, well done. You have recognized that the third best-selling author of all time after the Bible, after Shakespeare, is mystery writer Agatha Christie, who was very active back in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. Mysteries are powerful. And how they work is really what we would call the curiosity gap. So generally in a mystery, we've got some information, which you can see on the slide at the left and the right, but we don't have all the information. And the information that we don't have is bugging us. And so that's where the little smiley guy says, this is interesting because I don't have all the information that I want to have. I just had to throw this picture in, this picture from, it looked like Barnes and Noble, but where they've taken all the mystery books and put them with the binding in so you can't read their titles. So it truly is a mystery as to what the book is. But if you're in the bookstore, this is going to bug you. What are these books? And you're going to want to go and turn them around to find out exactly what they are. So if we can incorporate mystery, or something novel, something that's new and different, we can really hook our learners from the very beginning. So that's one thing. And we're going to look at some examples, and I'm going to do a brief lesson in just a minute that'll incorporate these. Stories are also extremely sticky. And someone actually very near and dear to my heart, Becky Lemke, helped me to learn this. She was my coach when I became a STAR trainer. Oh gosh, it was almost 10 years ago now. And she mentioned about how, when you first start doing STAR training and you haven't worked with students as much, your training's not going to be as good. But when you can incorporate stories about how you've used this with students and stories of how other people have used STAR reading with your students, your training is going to be so much better. And she was absolutely right. And I usually use stories as a basis to talk when I did STAR training. There's a lot of information in STAR training. But the stories made it come alive, and it was so much more memorable to learners. So thank you, Becky. That was among the many lessons that I have learned from you. And I love this picture of this woman here who's telling the culture of their civilization to these young people. Stories are sticky. Stories are powerful. One of the things that I researched for this presentation was a book by Dr. Judy Willis, and you can find the exact title of that book in the resource section toward the end of the handout. But Dr. Willis told a story about a physics review course that she took at Cambridge in the United Kingdom that she had to do before medical school. And it was a 6-week course on physics. And she was thinking, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And this is the subject matter is going to be so hard. And this was long before she became Dr. Judy Willis. This was when she was an undergraduate. And so the professor rolls in a red wagon wearing a wizard hat, holding a fire extinguisher, and he starts shooting off the fire extinguisher, and he is moving in the wagon based on the movement of this fire extinguisher as it shoots the foam off the walls. And he did that to illustrate Newton's third law of motion. And she never forgot that, because he didn't just go up and say, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. He lived it. He demonstrated it. He showed it. And this guy was 60 years old or whatever. And he came in a little red wagon dressed in a wizard's hat. She never forgot that. And this was something that happened 35 years ago. So these stories that she put in her book are very powerful for that. And this was something that was novel. This was something that she'd never seen before. And so both those things make for sticky teaching. So mysteries, novelty, stories, all these things are extremely sticky. And also using sensory experiences. We've got our 5 senses: smell, touch, taste, vision, and hearing. And I would add movement to this as well. Anytime that we can get our students up and moving around, this is going to be helpful as well. So we'll do 5 senses plus movement, make for powerful sticky teaching. So what are some ways that we can do this? And on the bottom of page 3, I've mentioned some ways that you could start with mystery or novelty, starting with questions, which we did at the beginning of our learning experience today. Telling stories, telling jokes is something that can provide the novelty. Start with an unusual fact or a quote. I'll bet you'll never forget about Cher and Mount Rushmore. Wearing costumes is a possibility as well. So all these things can help on the mystery and novelty side. Bringing in the senses, if we can show a video, if we can use a picture, if we can get students up and around and talking with each other, all those things will help. And the beauty of these sticky items is that they're more powerful when used in combination. So if we can bring in a story as well as the mystery, or maybe a story about a mystery and bring the senses into it as well, that makes it so much more powerful. So what I would like to do is demonstrate this in a brief lesson. And what we're going to do is we are going to start out with a true false question. So what I want you to do while I'm doing this lesson demo is certainly participate, because there'll be several ways in which you can do this through chat or through unmuting. But also like to do first, please, if you would, inside the chat, please answer this question. This is a true or false question. And the question is this, and this picture that you see on the screen is not an actual picture of anyone. It's just a picture of a nurse taking care of someone. So please put in the chat, true or false. Sometime in the last 105 years, we had a man that doctors described as a low functioning invalid, quote unquote, serving as president of the United States for the last 17 months of his term. True or false? Please put that inside the chat if you would. All right, so we got folks coming in. So yeah, take a guess with this. Think it's true, think it's false. President of the United States, most powerful man in the free world. Is this a true statement or is this a false statement? All right, well, while we're doing that, I'm going to tell you a story about a man who was desperate to see one idea that he had become adopted by the United States. And this man is President Woodrow Wilson. And to answer the true-false question, this is a true statement. We had a man that doctors described as a low-functioning invalid serving as President of the United States for the last 17 months. That's a year and a half of his term, believe it or not, during the period of 1919-1920. Well, President Woodrow Wilson had gone to France at the end of World War I to help negotiate the Treaty of Versailles. And it was very interesting because while he was there, something was going on. History, I don't think, repeats itself, but it sure does rhyme. There was a worldwide pandemic going on. We wouldn't know anything about that, would we? And they called it the Spanish flu pandemic, even though it started in Kansas in the United States. Some early example of fake news there. But he caught the flu while he was there and was very sick, but he recovered from it. But one of the ideas that he had as part of his 14 points for peace, World War I was a devastating war. Millions of people died. The United States, who was only involved in the war for the last year or so, had over 400,000 casualties in that very short period of time, which is, you know, similar to the death toll that we've experienced in this pandemic over the past year. But he thought, if we can get a group of nations together and they send representatives and we can talk out problems, we're not going to have war anymore. And so his goal was to create a League of Nations. And when he got back and presented the Treaty of Versailles to the Senate of the United States, a lot of people didn't like it because it had a clause in there where people interpreted it that it could get the United States involved in more foreign wars. And people didn't want that. No one wants their sons to go overseas and die. So there was a lot of feeling against it. So President Wilson said, I'm going to take my case to the people. And so he organized a trip where he traveled for 22 days, traveling 8,000 miles by train. And he gave during the course of that time 40 speeches. And he was no young man. He was 60 years old, recently recovered from the flu. He said, the quote you can see on the screen, I don't want to do anything foolhardy, but the League of Nations is now in its crisis. And if it fails, I hate to think what will happen to the world. I cannot put my personal safety, my health in the balance against my duty. I must go. And he did. His doctors advised him against it. His doctor advised against it, but he did. So he goes and does the speech. I'm not sure if he went to South Dakota during the speech or not, but he did go to California, and he was kind of swinging back, and he stopped in Pueblo, Colorado. And this was the 40th speech that he gave. He spoke an incredible number of words in every speech. And I had figured out that his speech was like a 12-page Word document with half-page margins, was this last speech that he gave. And this was in a day where they didn't always have good amplification every time that he spoke. So on September 25th, in Pueblo, Colorado, he gave this speech in the afternoon, and he collapsed at 10 o'clock that night. He had a stroke. And so what they did was they were trying to get him back as quickly as possible to Washington, D.C. And so he was a very sick man. The man who attended him said he was about as dead as a man could be and still be alive. So he goes back and they sequester him in the White House. And then on October the 2nd, he'd had a small stroke in Colorado. On October the 2nd, he had a massive stroke. He was completely paralyzed on his left side. He was blind in his left eye. His personal doctor said, my God, the president is paralyzed. And so no one saw him out in public, and there were all kinds of rumors floating around. His doctors just said, oh, he's had a nervous reaction in his digestive organs, but that was far from the truth. He was a very sick man. So they organized a meeting a few weeks after he had gotten back on his trip. And they sent a couple of senators to go check on him to see if he was okay and to see if the vice president had ought to take over. And Albert Fall was one of the senators who was tasked with going to the White House to see if the president was okay. And the legend is that Senator Fall said, I've been praying for you, sir. Now, Senator Fall was one of the Republicans who was very strongly against the League of Nations and one of Wilson's political enemies. And they had done a beautiful job staging this, where they had put Wilson in a darkened room. You can see the picture there. And they put a Afghan over his left side so no one could tell that he was paralyzed. And he was having a pretty good day when the two senators came in. The two senators did almost all the talking. He didn't say a whole lot. But after Senator Fall said, I've been praying for you, sir, Wilson was reported to have replied, which way, Senator? Which way? In other words, are you praying for me to live or are you praying for me to die, since they were political enemies? So they kind of pulled this charade off where people thought, well, at least he can function, but he was far from that. And he actually spent quite a bit of his time watching movies that Ray Baker, a journalist, would screen for him, of like him going to the Paris Peace Conference and all these early movies, which was really about all he could do. Ike Hoover, who was his chief usher, said the president did grow better, but that's not saying much. There was never a moment when he was more than a shadow of his former self. He said he could talk, but indistinctly, and think, but feebly. And again, this is the president. This is the man running the free world at the time. And I put letters on here to show, a lot of business was just not done. A lot of letters that were sent to the president were not opened until the 1950s by the National Archives. So what was going on? Who was running the show, so to speak? Well, this is where President Wilson's wife, Edith, comes in. He had married Edith in the White House after his first wife died. Actually, he asked her to marry him about 3 or 4 months after his wife had died. She had met him. It was love at first sight, an amazing love story. And she was trying to be the steward, and we'll talk about what that means. But I want you to look very carefully at this picture, please. Please look very carefully at this picture. And I want you to just tell, what do you notice? What's different, or maybe what's a little bit unusual? This again is President Wilson, and there is his wife, Edith, by his side. Look very closely. What do you notice about what's going on here? And if you'd like to unmute and talk, or if you'd like to put that inside of the chat, we can do either one of those things. What are we seeing here? What is going on here?
Well, we don't see much of his left side, and his wife is flattening out the paper so he can sign.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure what LSS stands for. Lutheran
Social Services, San Luis New Mary.
Okay. I was wondering, is that your initials? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything that we notice there? Thank you. Both of those comments were outstanding.
She seems to be the one that's deciding what to sign. She's putting the things down, taking them away, moving them over, and so she's making the decision. He's just basically there to sign things.
Okay, and good. And you guys are very, very perceptive. Excellent, because you can see those papers on her desk. But I love all of those comments, and thank you for those who are putting things inside the chat. Both comments are great. In his left side, he's paralyzed. He cannot do anything with it. So notice that he's writing with his right hand, and she, since he doesn't have his left hand to steady, is doing that. So she acted as the steward, as she controlled what he saw, who he saw, and what he did. I was very fortunate a couple of years ago when I first developed this lesson, in contact with some folks at the Woodrow Wilson Library. And I asked them, could you send me something that Edith wrote on? And so this is how things worked. You can see this telegram, and this is interesting as well. The telegram's not sent to President Wilson. It's sent to his doctor. It's sent to Dr. Carey Grayson, who was his doctor. And so they, people were knowing that you don't directly address the president, address his wife, or address the doctor. And the Henry Morgenthau was a gentleman who sent this telegram, and he's basically asking Dr. Grayson if he'd asked President Wilson, should I speak about what's going on in the situation with the Turks in Constantinople? He had been the ambassador to the Ottoman Empire at that time. And you can see at the bottom, written in pencil, this is how Edith would take these things to her husband, to President Wilson, and she would write on the letter or whatever in pencil what he had said. And so you can see in her script there at the bottom, thinks it well to postpone speaking on such subjects, is supposedly what Wilson said about this issue. So this is how government was going on. And people, senators were suspicious, because I know one of the Thanksgiving proclamation that the president was supposed to give, someone else wrote it, and he just signed his name at the bottom and made no changes, which was totally different from how he used to operate. But Edith Wilson said, "So began my stewardship. I studied every paper sent from the different secretaries and tried to digest and present in tabloid form, or in other words, like the condensed version, a smaller version, the things that despite my vigilance, I had to go to the president. And she said, and this is in her memoirs, so I'm sure she's probably painting the best face on things. She said, I never myself made a single decision regarding the disposition of public affairs. Only decided what was important and what was not. And the very important decision of when to present things to her husband. In other words, when he was feeling good, when he was feeling well enough to make decisions and say things. So the question that I have for you, and please in the chat or please unmute, let's think about this question a minute. Did this, the stewardship that she describes here on the screen, did this make Edith Wilson the acting president of the United States? Was the fact that she was the steward controlling access, did that make her acting president? Make her a loving wife? Something in between? Please chat, or all the brave souls that have been unmuting, I would love to hear from you. Let's see, we're getting several things. Heather says more or less. Heather, would you mind unmuting and talking a little bit more about that, if you don't mind?
I'm not really sure what to say. I mean, even when you read her quote there, I think she's saying, I myself never made a single decision. But then she goes on to say, the only decision that was mine, sorry, the things keep getting in my way. The only decision that was mine, come on, chat, go away. Was what was important. Well, that to me means she's making the decisions on what should be signed by the president, right? So she's making presidential decisions there.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather. Well said. You knew exactly what to say. And I would especially want to prompt students to say, you know, back up your statement with evidence, which you did beautifully. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you. Let's see. Kate says not officially, but she did the work of an acting president. Yeah, she certainly was not elected. Dwayne says something in between. Dwayne, I know in other workshops you have been not hesitating to speak. Would you mind telling us what that in between would look like?
Well, like Heather said, she was making the decisions what were important, but still, like Heather said, she was making that decision, and she consulted with the president on the matters that she brought up. So, you know, I don't know if she influenced him in this or if she just said, presented the problem. So anyways.
Thank you, Dwayne. Well said. Well said. Appreciate that. Mary asks, did he have his full thinking ability? And the Dr. Grayson and Edith want us to believe that that is the case. And other people on the scene, you know, his usher, Ike Hoover, the man that was, you know, with him every day, said he did not. So we really, history at all, a lot of times it depends on who you believe and what, where is the truth? Is the truth here? Is the truth there? Is the truth somewhere in between? So that's a great question, Mary. Several folks, Becky is mentioning about the chief of staff role, who's they're not the president, but they're certainly in a very powerful position. Lynn says somewhat yes. Karen says yes, acting president by deciding what to present. Let's see, Royce makes a very good thing. I think presidents' wives and others have always affected policy, and I think that's very true. You know, what's talked about behind the scenes. I think these conversations have gone on for hundreds of years. Let's see, Dorothy mentioned she's not inaugurated. That's an interesting thought. And yeah, I don't want to spell inauguration either. I feel your pain on that one. Let's see. Mac mentions his wife wants to portray him as fine, but it sounds like conversation about bias and primary sources. Yeah, very good, Mac. That would certainly lend to a great conversation about that. And, this was from her memoir, Edith Wilson's memoir. So of course she's going to put the best face on things. So that's certainly, certainly a great thought. So the vice president, what's going on during all this time? Well, the vice president was the governor of Indiana. Does that sound familiar? Mike Pence, anyone? History again is rhyming. So the vice president had been governor of Indiana, serving in his second term as President Wilson's vice president. Thomas Marshall and Wilson had kind of a falling out in the first term, and he didn't trust him with any information about what was going on in the country. So he's kind of out of it. He's most known for the statement, "What this country really needs is a good 5-cent cigar." That's his claim to fame. But Marshall didn't want to become president, really. He was very happy. He was going across the country making speeches and getting paid for it. And so he's like, who wants to be the president? I'm happy with my gig as VP and it's paying well and this is great. They actually removed him from his office in the White House because people would come on the tour and he would say, like, if you look on me as a wild animal, be kind enough to throw peanuts at me. So they thought that wasn't a very presidential or vice presidential thing to say. So they kicked him out of his office in the White House and put him back near the Senate cloakroom. So, but Marshall said, I would only take over if it was clear that Wilson could not fulfill his duties. And there was just really a lot of ambiguity, a lot of uncertainty as to how well he was functioning there. So and he said, only if President Wilson and Dr. Grayson certify that Wilson's unable to perform the duties of president will I think about taking over. And Congress must pass a resolution to say the office is vacant. And none of that happened. So he never took over for those 17 months. This is also a very interesting picture of Wilson here with his cane. This is one of the last cabinet meetings that took place. And there was actually some fake news that occurred after this picture came out because the administration wanted to portray that Wilson was still strong and robust and able to do his duties. And I've seen pictures where this cane was blotted out. So they were trying to control what the people were seeing there. Very interesting things. So this brings up a discussion to modern day. We heard during the last year of President Trump administration where Nancy Pelosi and others were saying we ought to invoke the 25th Amendment, which came because of this situation. It was so ambiguous as to whether the president, when is the president incapacitated? When is the president unable to perform their duties? And so this was the driving force behind the 25th Amendment. And so we now have greater clarity. And we've seen recently where presidents, when they were undergoing surgery, would, for a time when they're under anesthetic, make the vice president the acting president during that time until such time where they could function again. And I think most recent presidents have done that. I'm not sure that President Trump ever did or not, but I know his predecessors did there. So the 25th Amendment has come as a result of that, which clearly spells out when the vice president should take over. So this brings the question, and once again, I would be thrilled either in the chat or with unmute if we would respond to this. What right does the public have to know about the president's health? The presidency is incredibly emotionally and physically taxing. Look at these pictures. There's Bill Clinton in 1993. He looks like a very young man, which he was. I think he was in his late 40s or so when he took office. And look at the same picture of him in 2001. If I had just seen that picture, I would describe him as an old man with that one. The office ages one. And we've had presidents here recently that have been older. President Biden, President Trump, both of them were at a fairly advanced age. And so, and we haven't always, recently, we haven't always heard a lot of things about the president's health. I remember back in the 2016 campaign when Hillary Clinton collapsed and she didn't go to a doctor. She went to her daughter's house and there was a big brouhaha about that. And President Trump had that crazy letter where his doctor said that he was the fittest man ever to be president. but to look at him, you would not think that. So these things continue. President Kennedy here in the picture suffered from Addison's disease, which is pretty debilitating. Grover Cleveland there in the picture on the right had secret surgery to remove a cancerous growth from his mouth. And no one knew it until 15 years, well, very few people knew it until 15 years after the fact. So this begs the question, what right does the public have to know about the president's health? So please let's weigh in, either chat or if we would like to please unmute. Would love to hear our opinions about this important topic. What right do we have to know about the president's health?
I'll jump in. This is Royce.
Thanks, Royce.
Cornerstones. I agree with what Amy says. Excuse me. Being married to a mayor, I don't think that it is necessarily everyone in Vermilion's right to just know every time my wife gets sick or something like that. So I think there should be, it should be based on ability to do the job. And of course, who gets to decide that? I mean, hopefully in the United States, we would decide that by legislation, but something that would affect their cognition, something like that.
Thank you, Royce. Are you like the first dude of Vermilion?
I am, yes. I am the first gentleman of Vermilion.
First gentleman. I like that even better. Cool. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? And like Heather mentioning, do you lose your right to privacy by being president? That's a good issue. Let's see. Stephanie echoes that. Let's see. And Lynn mentions we should know that if they're stable enough to make, important decisions. Interesting comment about the company, so to speak. Let's see, and Kate says, I agree with Amy, the press has the right to privacy, but if it's going to affect their ability to serve, the public needs to know. What's considered debilitating enough to know? That's a great question. Very good. So thank you all for those. So we could talk a lot about this, but our mission really today is to think about stickiness. So let's again think about this in either chat or we can say this out loud. We talked about several things prior to this mini lesson. What made it sticky? How did we, in this lesson about presidential health, what elements of sticky teaching did we put inside it? In other words, how was this lesson sticky? What things that we talked about prior to the mini lesson were evident in this? And I think I'm hearing someone unmute.
Maybe not, but I will, Steve.
Thanks, Becky.
You're welcome. The Wilson story is just a good story. I mean, it's got so many different facets, so many different aspects of it are so interesting. And I think especially currently in our world, because there are those parallels to what has happened in our recent history and what happened in our more distant history as a country, that it really can be very intriguing to just hear that story and to think about how it can connect to our current situation and to some of us personally.
Well said. Thank you, Becky. Appreciate that. Let's see, Royce mentioned starting with a question. Tim mentions we had pictures because we did see various pictures and especially that one of Edith, his wife, with the paper. Some interesting facts. The unusual quotes from Kay Crandall, thank you. Let's see, Kate mentioned the initial questions were a hook to get us interested and start thinking. Thank you, Kate. Let's see, Paul mentioned the tie-in to recent history and the questions. Good. Thank you. All right, so good stuff there. We've gotten several different ways where we can see the stickiness there. And thank you, again, so much for that. So that was certainly our goal here, of putting those sticky elements in there. And if we can do more than one, again, the power of these is magnified if we can bring more in. So we try to do the mystery, the questions, the visuals, all those things. And always, to make it more interactive, always wanting to try to get as much, much of the students as we can get inside that as well. So I have another question here for you as we segue for our last few minutes. Who has a bigger attention span, people or goldfish? And I would, again, put in the chat, please, what your opinion would be on this very important subject. Do people or goldfish have the larger attention span? Give a second so people, please put your guess in. And by the way, I always do, when teaching, I think it's important for all the students to take a guess if you do something like this, because that gives them buy-in, so to speak. They want to know, whether they're right or not. So I always do insist in a nice way that students will, you want to put a guess in, so they've got that buy-in, because that's the part of the research shows that that does add to the engagement for sure. And so I guess my biggest question was this, is I wonder how they found this out. This is probably a multi-million-dollar government grant to figure out people and goldfish. And this is certainly an interesting question. And of course, after I've seen this, I saw about 50 blog posts where people said this wasn't true. So I don't know, but it's interesting. So I'm going to stick with it, even though it may or may not be 100% true. So has everyone who wanted to taken a guess? People or goldfish, the biggest attention span? So the answer is, according to this research, the humans have an 8-second attention span, and goldfish supposedly have a 9-second attention span. So take that with a grain of salt, but I find it to be very interesting. So I'm on page 4. Thank you. I'm saying thank you to my wife who brought me something I needed here. So page 4, what happens to attention over time? And I think if we've spent any time teaching, we know this to be the case, that attention is kind of like a roller coaster going down, where we generally have decent attention, and especially as we approach that 8 to 10 minute mark in any learning situation. But then, after that, it's just like, oh, we've fallen off the roller coaster from there. And so this begs the question, well, how can we have more beginnings in the thing that we teach? That would certainly help if we could have more, more beginnings. And so how does this happen? How do we make this work? If you would go to page 4 inside your handout, I will give you a suggestion about how we can do this. And what we're calling these are resets. These are ways that we're doing a learning activity, and then we're kind of stopping and shifting gears to do another type of learning activity. I had first seen this in a work by Horton, e-learning by design, and he calls the various things that we can do in teaching absorb activities, do activities, and connect activities. And I really loved that way. And I've been doing this for years before I ever knew that there was any research behind this. I started out my career before I got into adult ed. I taught high school for 3 years, and I quickly learned that, man, if you're trying to do a long activity with the students, forget about it. We changed in a 50-minute class period. We changed activities quite a bit. And I've continued to do this as I've worked in adult ed over the past 28 years. So we can do, and what I like to think about absorb, do, and connect is like a wheel that rolls. And so an absorb activity is anything that we're doing where students are taking in information. This might be if we're doing a brief lecture, this might be where we're reading something, this might be where we're watching a video. And I think it's good to keep these times short. If we can do these activities in less than 10 to 15 minutes. And that was another wonderful thing I learned from Becky in STAR, that a lot of times doing longer on these teaching demos doesn't result in any greater gains for the student. So if we can keep these absorb sections fairly short, and then we've presented the information, but of course that doesn't mean the students have learned it. They need to do something with the information. They need to do something active with that information. And so we could then put in a do and connect activities. Do just simply means where students are doing something active. Middle of page 4, this could be something where maybe they're answering some questions. This could be something where maybe they're completing a graphic organizer. This could be maybe something where they're writing a summary, a bumper sticker summary, a one sentence summary of what they've learned. And then when we can bring in connect activities there as well, where learners are talking with other learners, but we can see how these resets reset attention is really what they're doing. So instead of the 50-minute lecture, we have a shorter chunk of information. And I know several of your presenters the last couple of days, I saw Andrea do this, and I know Becky and Jane did this yesterday, talked about your classroom routine. You can think about keeping these in these bite-sized 10 to 15-minute chunks as you do various techniques. And by the way, gosh, those were those routines, Becky and Jane, I know Jane's not on here, but those were fabulous. Wow, good stuff. You guys are blessed in South Dakota to have such wonderful PD providers. And if Becky says it, I'm believing it 100%. So we could get on the cycle with absorb, do, and connect and work these in. And that doesn't mean we have to always do this in this order. This just means that be conscious of in your classroom routine of not staying on the same activity for quite so long. Think about these 10 to 15-minute chunks and cycle through. If your class meets for an hour, if your class is meeting for 2 hours or an hour and a half or whatever, it'd be good to go through several cycles of this where we're doing these various routines. And your students will thank you because that information reset will result in greater engagement, in greater learning for sure. So yeah, I love the this with the absorb, like the sponge, we're taking in information, but the sponge is going to hold a whole lot more water if we've done these active activities in order to keep it there, to do something with it will make a huge, huge difference. And connect is something that's been a whole lot harder to do with pandemic teaching as we've been teaching more online, but we can still do it. It's just not as easy with breakout rooms and in other ways to make that work. But I'm thankful that we're opening back up a bit more and be able to do more face-to-face teaching, which makes that a little bit easier, because that's certainly one thing that we've learned through the pandemic is how critical community is. And community is so important, where learners can bounce ideas off of each other, explain things in such a way that many times we as instructors can't get across, but someone's peer can get across so much easier there. So these community things are very, very helpful. And on page 6, I had suggested several things. If you want to flip over in your handout, please, to page 6, about different things you can do. Many of these are geared toward face-to-face learning, but can certainly be modified toward the teaching on Zoom or however else you are working with your students there. So I'd like for you to do this. I think it's always good. And I know as we're approaching the end of our time together in part A, let's reflect for a minute. I love this quote from John Dewey, who says, "We don't learn from experiences, we learn from reflecting on experiences." And I think that is so important. So think about a recent lesson you taught and see if you can identify inside that lesson, what were the absorb activities, what were the do activities, what were the connect. And you kind of analyze, think about your classroom routine. First question is, do you have a classroom routine? And if not, what could we do to develop one? Certainly, Becky and Jane and Andrea have given you some excellent ways to do this and some excellent ideas about how to make that happen. But think about, because a lot of times we get caught in the comfortable, I guess is what I want to say. And think about, well, what can I do to make my routine a little bit more friendly, to make sure that my learners are really getting that information and doing something with it? So take a minute and think, how could we absorb or add some do and connect activities to, we're usually very good about doing the absorb part, about giving the information, whether that be by speaking or teacher talk or showing a video or whatever. But how can we do more do and connect activities? I think a lot of times we feel that pressure, we've got to cover all these standards and, oh, I've got to do all this. But more is not better. And a lot of times we think we've quote unquote covered something where we really haven't. So I'm going to give just a silent minute or two to take a minute and reflect. How can we do absorb, do, connect? Also reflect about the elements of stickiness that we've talked about so far. If you want to add something in the chat, please do so. You don't have to. I'm just asking you to really just take a second and reflect on your own teaching. What's my routine like? And I'm going to stop talking because it's harder to reflect when I talk. So we'll give a minute or two to reflect, and then we'll come to a close. Or just was laughing at Heather's comment from a few minutes ago. You're welcome, Heather. So we've had a minute or two here to reflect. But think about, as you're developing lessons, what elements of stickiness can we do? How can we get those attention grabbers? And I think that's something in K-12 that they probably are doing a little bit better than what we might be inside adult ed. How can we add that stickiness inside our class routine? How can we cycle through these periods of absorb and do and connect? So I'll put in a brief commercial here. Part B, we're going to look at several other elements of stickiness. We've got another round of South Dakota trivia. You won't want to miss that. And we will have some fun. I'll do another lesson intro about the other elements of stickiness. And I'm very much looking forward to being with you again for part B. Let's see. Yeah, Stephanie's mentioned about relevance, and we will talk about that more in part B. That's an excellent point, Stephanie. Let's see. Telly mentioned I teach different breathing exercises. Yeah, good, because that's in that break. That's really where that learning consolidation can take place. So that is, I'm so glad you do that, Telly. And from what we just learned in the last session as well, that's a stress reducer. So that helps with students with anxiety. And of course, with math, we need as much, anxiety reducing as we can get, for sure.
Well, thank you, Steve. And does anybody have any questions for Steve before we see him this afternoon? If we also have an session with Andrea this afternoon as well. Does anybody have any questions before we do? I already spun the wheel, so I wouldn't have the gobbledygook this time. I can announce the winner. Unless John wants to interrupt for the drum roll. Okay, I spun the wheel, and the winner for this session, if she's on, is Jennifer Keys.
Does she win a new car and a trip to Jamaica?
Or a $25
But she's
Walmart
here.
gift. Yes, she is. Good.
You
Or a
overestimate our
$25 gift card from Walmart.
Yeah.
This is adult ed. What was I thinking? Okay, of course.
In South Dakota, no less. All right. We will see everyone this afternoon. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome. See you in a bit.